You stand in the choking summer heat of London. 1854. The city hums with carriages, market cries, and the metallic clang of iron wheels, but what clings most is the smell. It is not coal smoke this time. It is the odor of waste. So thick you can taste it. Human excrement, horse dung, rotting vegetables, and sour water mingle in the air like an invisible fog. On Broad Street, Soho, you see a queue forming at the pump. Mothers balancing tin pails, children clutching mugs, servants filling buckets. Their faces carry relief. Here, the water is considered pure. You watch as a boy drinks deeply, splashing cool liquid over his cheeks. By dawn, his skin will take on a ghostly hue, his veins collapsing as if his very blood has drained away. He will die not from lack of water, but because of it. The corpses come quickly, within hours of the first cramps. Men collapse in alleys. Women scream as relatives expel fluid endlessly until nothing remains but skin pulled taut over bone. The gutters glisten not only with refuse but with vomit, carried downhill by trickles of sewage. Wooden dead carts roll across cobblestones, the drivers stuffing rags in their noses to dull the odor. In some parishes, every door is marked by mourning cloth. You hear people whisper, "The Blue Death." The name comes from the strange color cholera leaves on the skin. A bluish gray, as though the body has been drowned from within. Physicians debate in newspapers. Is it foul air, miasma, that carries the curse? Or is it the water itself, the very lifeblood of the city? No one agrees. Meanwhile, the dead pile higher, and you, standing in this place, feel the dread of breathing, of drinking, of touching. Everything that sustains life has become suspect. The past is not dead. It is only waiting. If this is the moment you realize Victorian London isn't somewhere you'd want to time travel, consider subscribing. It won't protect you from cholera, but at least it'll keep these stories from being flushed back into history. And if you've managed to stomach this much filth without running away, alike is cheaper than chloride of lime and far easier to spread. Now, step deeper into the city itself. London in the mid-19th century is the jewel of empire, a furnace of industry, wealth, and invention. But beneath its shining facades, the streets are lined with open cesspits, drains, and overflowing privies. Tenements are built on marshy ground where water seeps into basements. Night soil men, who clear waste, often dump it illegally in ditches or directly into the Thames. That same river, thick with refuse and slaughterhouse blood, is also the source of drinking water for millions. Water companies pipe river water into homes without filtration. Families believe it is a blessing of modern life, turning taps instead of fetching buckets. They do not see what you see, that this water is already poisoned. It carries cholera from body to body with terrifying speed. The first epidemic struck in 1832, leaving more than 6,000 Londoners dead. A second in 1849 killed over 14,000. In each wave, the poor suffered most, families crammed into one-room cellars, where drains backed up into kitchens, and rats scuttled through sleeping mats. In those places, cholera was no stranger. It was a tenant. But in 1854, the outbreak centered here in Soho would prove different. Not because it killed fewer, it claimed more than 600 lives in a matter of weeks, but because one physician, Dr. John Snow, dared to challenge the belief in miasma. He suspected the pump itself, the water, was the silent executioner. His investigation would change not only the course of the epidemic but the future of medicine. For now, though, you stand in a city where no one believes him yet. The pump handle still turns. Children still drink, and with every swallow, another death silently waits. You hear it before you understand it. The muffled groans from behind shuttered doors. The sudden silences that followed too quickly. In the first week of August 1854, Soho becomes restless. Families whisper that neighbors who were well at breakfast are buried by nightfall. The parish registers, normally filled with baptisms and marriages, swell instead with hurriedly scrawled death entries. The earliest cases are treated as accidents of fate. A laborer collapses in the street, his body twisting with cramps so severe that onlookers think he is possessed. Within hours, his skin is clammy, his lips purpled, and his voice reduced to a whisper before it fades entirely. His corpse, once heavy, feels curiously light, as if the water has been wrung from him like a cloth. Soon, such sights become familiar. You walk through Berwick Street and see doors barred, windows covered with sheets to signal contagion. Outside, a cart waits with two small coffins, each no larger than a cradle. A woman sits nearby, rocking back and forth, her hands stained from scrubbing the floor where her children died. She does not cry. There are no tears left. Doctors are summoned, but their remedies are worse than useless. Calomel, laudanum, mustard poultices, brandy by the cupful, all prescribed in desperation. Some patients are bled, others blistered. Nothing halts the torrent of fluid that pours from the body. The wealthy flee the neighborhood, leaving servants behind to face the plague. The newspapers at first print cautious notes. A severe outbreak of bowel complaint has afflicted several households in Soho. By the second week, the tone hardens. Cholera has returned. Panic spreads faster than the disease. People clutch pomanders, scatter vinegar on doorsteps, and burn pitch to cleanse the air. The belief in miasma, poisonous vapors, dominates. Every foul smell is feared as death itself. Yet the reality lies deeper. Beneath the cobbles, the sewers overflow. Cesspits dug into basements leak into water pipes. In some houses, the drinking well lies a mere yard from the privy. You bend down and smell the water drawn fresh from the pump, at first only cool and metallic, but beneath it, a faint sourness, like the breath of decay. Families cannot detect it, or do not wish to. Water is too precious to question. By late August, entire streets are struck. Golden Square, Broad Street, Cambridge Street, all echo with the sounds of vomiting, prayers, and cartwheels. The Reverend Henry Whitehead, curate of St. Luke's, moves from house to house, recording deaths, praying over the fallen. He notes how swiftly cholera carries its victims. Strong men carried to bed in the morning are corpses by evening. The speed is merciless. A child eats bread and cheese at midday. By dusk her body is racked, her eyes sunken, her voice gone. The neighbors refuse to enter. The corpse is lifted with tongs. The bedding burned in the yard. Even funerals are stripped bare of ritual. Coffins are sealed quickly, sometimes without a service, lowered into common graves where lime is scattered to mask the stench. Londoners begin to speak of divine punishment. Some argue it is the immorality of the poor that brings such wrath. Others blame immigrants, or slaughterhouses, or stagnant weather. Few dare to suspect that the very water they drink, the water they bless children with, the water they boil tea from, is the agent of death. You stand by Broad Street pump itself, the iron handle shining from constant use. In one hand, you see a girl clutching her mug. In the other, a man filling a bucket. Neither knows that within days they will be beyond help. They trust the pump more than any doctor. They trust it more than their own neighbors. By September, the toll is unmistakable. In 3 days alone, over 500 perish within a few blocks. Coffin makers work without pause, their yards stacked high with timber. At night, the silence is broken by the groaning of carts, wheels grinding over cobblestones as bodies are carried to burial. The smell of chloride of lime, used to wash the streets, mingles with human waste until the entire district reeks of sickness. The authorities argue about what to do. Some suggest firing cannons to disperse the miasma. Others recommend fumigating houses with sulfur. These efforts change nothing. The numbers climb relentlessly. In parlors and kitchens, chairs are left empty, beds unmade, toys abandoned. Life is erased with terrifying efficiency. And yet, amidst this devastation, the seeds of discovery stir. Dr. John Snow, already skeptical of miasma, walks these same streets with notebook in hand. He maps each death, each household, each line leading back to the pump. He sees what others cannot, or will not, that the pattern points not to air, but to water. But his conviction is still only suspicion. For now, the pump flows freely, and the dead cart rolls on. The first wave has broken. And you, standing in Soho, realize you are not safe. Every drop of water may carry death. Every sip is a gamble. You walk again through Soho, and the neighborhood no longer resembles a place of the living. It has become a district of silence punctuated only by the rattle of wheels, the slosh of water poured over stone steps, and the occasional sharp cry that breaks when another life is lost. The summer heat turns every alley into a furnace. The stench thickens, clinging to your skin, filling your lungs until you gag. The carts creak by with increasing weight, not just one or two coffins, but a heap of bodies piled together, wrapped in sheets, strapped down with ropes. Drivers, their mouths covered with vinegar-soaked cloth, hurry to common pits where lime is scattered to mute the odor of rot. In some churchyards, the ground is already full. Gravediggers swing picks into hard clay, digging faster than priests can read rites. In desperation, multiple corpses are lowered into a single grave. The clatter of wood against wood echoes as coffins press together in narrow pits. London is unprepared. The Metropolitan Commission of Sewers debates remedies. But their sewers empty directly into the Thames, the same river that supplies drinking water downstream. The very system that promises modern progress has become an open vein of contagion. Families lock themselves indoors. Curtains remain drawn all day. The smell of chloride of lime and tar drifts through streets where entire households have perished. Neighbors whisper of houses where no one answers the door, until the constable forces it open and finds corpses in every bed. One report describes a child still alive, sitting between the bodies of its parents, too weak to cry, too frightened to move. Doctors, overwhelmed, argue in pamphlets and newspapers. The miasmatists, firm in their belief, demand that cesspools be emptied, that streets be flushed with water, that air be purified. But their measures fail. The deaths multiply. The Broad Street outbreak alone claims more than 600 souls in less than 2 weeks. Across the city, the number reaches thousands. And yet amid this storm, John Snow walks deliberately through the devastation. A physician known for his work with anesthesia, Snow has grown skeptical of the miasma theory. He notices the clustering of cases, their proximity to the Broad Street pump. With a notebook, he marks each household stricken. A map begins to form, dots surrounding the pump like flies around carrion. He records exceptions too. Workers at a nearby brewery, who drink beer instead of water, largely spared. A woman in Hampstead who once loved the taste of Broad Street water and had it delivered daily, who dies miles away from Soho. His evidence grows, but convincing others is another matter. The Board of Guardians, skeptical and fearful of economic panic, resists immediate action. To remove the pump handle would be to admit that the city's water, the very promise of progress, is poisoned. And yet Snow persists. While debates continue, the people suffer. You see mothers carrying buckets from the pump with one hand and holding the limp arm of a sick child with the other. You see fathers pouring water into the mouths of their kin, not knowing that with each swallow, death is ensured. The irony is unbearable. Life's most basic need turned into a weapon. By night, fires burn in courtyards as bedding and clothing are destroyed. The flames lick high, sparks drifting into the black sky. While neighbors watch silently, it is not only bodies that vanish into the earth, it is possessions. Furniture, blankets, anything suspected of contamination. The poor lose not just their families, but the little they owned. In Parliament, discussions grow heated. Members complain of the unbearable stench along the Thames embankments. The phrase, "Great Stink," is whispered even before the infamous summer of 1858. Pamphlets call for reform, for new sewers, for stricter oversight of water companies. But bureaucracy moves slower than cholera. The churchyards, meanwhile, echo with hurried prayers. Funeral services shrink to minutes. The clergy unable to keep pace. Some parishes suspend normal rituals altogether. The dead are lowered without hymn or farewell. As though speed itself might blunt the epidemic's edge, you stand by a grave as multiple coffins descend, the ropes straining under the weight, the lime dust rising like smoke when the first shovelfuls of earth strike. Yet, despite the horror, denial persists. Many cling to the belief that cholera floats on the air, not in the water. They douse floors with carbolic acid, wave burning rags in rooms, hang camphor bags around their necks. Nothing saves them. The disease cuts through miasma believers and skeptics alike. At last, Snow presents his findings to the local authorities. He explains the pattern, the exceptions, the logic. Reluctantly, they consent. The pump handle is removed. It is a simple act, so small as to seem absurd against the tide of death. But within days, the cases begin to fall. The outbreak that burned through Soho loses its fury. For the families already gone, the measure comes too late. But in that silence after the storm, something shifts. A realization grows that the invisible killer might not be in the air, but in the very water itself. You step back from the pump, its iron handle now useless, and look around at streets emptied not by commerce but by mortality. The survivors move cautiously, as though sound itself might summon the disease again. The smell of lime lingers, and the memory of cries echoes in doorways. For London, cholera has left scars deeper than the graves it filled. When the pump handle was removed, the sound of iron against stone seemed almost too small to matter. Yet in the days that followed, the fury of the outbreak began to subside. The numbers dwindled, not because the dead were saved, but because there were fewer living left to claim. Soho had been emptied not by fire or flood, but by thirst quenched from the wrong source. Now you walk through the streets, and it is not chaos that greets you, but silence. Windows remain shuttered. Many shops never reopen. Whole households have disappeared. Their possessions auctioned off to strangers or left to rot in damp rooms. The smell of chloride of lime still clings to the stones, but beneath it lingers a sweeter, more stubborn odor, the faint reek of bodies buried in haste, of disease soaked into the very foundations of homes. At Golden Square, the air is heavy with absence. A week earlier, cries and footsteps filled the courtyards. Now, you hear only the echo of your own movements. The pump stands useless, its handle missing, its spout dry. Children who once played nearby are gone. Their toys, left behind, are covered in dust. The church registers provide the only testimony. Hundreds of names, entire families wiped out within days. The statistics read coldly, but in each line lies a story. The tailor's apprentice, the brewer's wife, the infant whose coffin never received a proper inscription. In some cases, only initials are recorded, no one left alive to speak the full names. Doctors, though weary, continue to argue. The majority still insist on miasma, convinced that foul air is the agent of cholera. Snow's theory is dismissed by many as speculation. To them, the notion that water, clear, tasteless, odorless, could contain death is almost unthinkable. And so pamphlets continue to recommend fumigations, open fires in the streets, vinegar washes on walls. The old rituals of purification persist, though the evidence of their futility lies buried in the ground. Yet Snow is not alone. Reverend Henry Whitehead, once a skeptic, takes it upon himself to investigate further. He interviews survivors, traces their habits, follows their footsteps. Slowly, he confirms what Snow had suspected, that the Broad Street pump was the epicenter. Whitehead's testimony, combined with Snow's maps, begins to form a body of evidence too compelling to ignore. For the survivors, however, science brings little comfort. Poverty deepens. Families who lost breadwinners slide further into destitution. Children orphaned by cholera wander the streets, begging or taken into workhouses already overcrowded. The poor, once blamed for spreading filth, are now simply pitied or forgotten. Charities distribute food and clothing, but their efforts are drowned by the scale of need. Meanwhile, fear lingers, even after the outbreak fades. Every stomach cramp, every sudden illness sparks dread that cholera has returned. The mere sound of water being pumped can stir unease. In drawing rooms, middle-class families boil their water, though not all understand why. In Parliament, debates grow sharper. Should water companies be forced to relocate intakes upriver? Should sewers be redesigned? Each proposal meets resistance from vested interests. But the idea that something must change can no longer be ignored. You walk along the Thames, and here the scale of the problem is undeniable. Barges drift on waters thick with sludge. The tide carries not only waste but the memory of thousands. The river, once called the city's lifeblood, has become its poisoned vein. In hot weather, the stench rises so fiercely that even officials, long indifferent to the complaints of the poor, are forced to notice. Newspapers, emboldened by the calamity, publish scathing reports. They print maps of cholera's spread, engravings of dead carts, lists of the fallen. One cartoon depicts Death himself drawing water from the pump. Satire mixes with grief, and public pressure builds. For the first time, voices demand not temporary remedies, but permanent reform. And yet, the scars remain personal. You step into a house on Broad Street where a family of 6 once lived. Only one child survived. The rooms are bare now, the walls streaked with lime, the furniture burned in a courtyard fire. In the corner of a room, carved into plaster, you notice a faint inscription, a single name, perhaps scratched by a child's hand before the end. Such traces outlast statistics. They are whispers etched into silence. As autumn arrives, the epidemic's fury has passed, but its lesson remains unlearned by many. Snow's work, though groundbreaking, does not immediately transform public health. His findings are filed, debated, and shelved by skeptics. The poor return to their tenements. The sewers continue to empty into the Thames. Another epidemic waits on the horizon. Still, something has shifted. The Broad Street outbreak becomes a case study, a spark that will, years later, ignite reform. Engineers like Joseph Bazalgette begin to design vast new sewers, projects that will eventually cleanse the Thames. But for now, in 1854, London lives in the uneasy calm after a storm, breathing the same air, drinking the same water, haunted by the memory of sudden death. And you, standing amid the silent houses, understand. The greatest terror of cholera is not only how it kills, but how it lingers, erasing voices, leaving only empty rooms, maps dotted with crosses, and the faint smell of lime where once families lived. The outbreak of 1854 left Soho scarred, but it did not vanish into memory as quickly as other epidemics had. Instead, it lingered in arguments, in reforms half-born, in the stubborn refusal of many to accept the truth. You walk through the city in the years that follow, and everywhere you see the imprint of cholera, not just in death registers, but in the very bones of London's transformation. John Snow did not live to see his theory universally accepted. He died in 1858, 4 years after the Broad Street outbreak, of a stroke. At the time of his passing, many still dismissed his waterborne theory as fanciful. Yet his map of deaths, his interviews, his meticulous notes survived him. and in them lay the seeds of revolution. Today, they are recognized as one of the foundations of modern epidemiology. But in his own century, they were only one voice among many. The dominant belief in miasma persisted. Physicians clung to the conviction that foul air carried disease, pointing to the undeniable stench of London as proof. And indeed, the stench was undeniable. In the summer of 1858, only 4 years after Soho's devastation, the Thames itself rose in rebellion. That season would be remembered as the Great Stink. The hot sun baked the river's polluted surface until the smell penetrated Parliament itself. Curtains soaked in chloride of lime failed to mask it. Members fled sessions, gagging, their eyes watering. At last, denial could no longer withstand sensation. This moment of crisis gave engineers like Joseph Bazalgette the chance they needed. Bazalgette, appointed chief engineer of the Metropolitan Board of Works, proposed an ambitious solution: a vast network of intercepting sewers, designed to carry waste away from the Thames. His plan required miles of brick-lined tunnels, pumping stations, and embankments, an undertaking so monumental that it would reshape the city for generations. You stand along the riverbank as construction begins. The clang of picks and shovels echoes. Barges laden with bricks drift downstream. Scaffolding rises along the embankments. Men labor day and night, sweating in tunnels where the air is thick with damp clay and lantern smoke. It is backbreaking work, but with each new stretch of pipe laid, the river's burden lightens. The reforms extend beyond engineering. The cholera epidemics force new thinking about public health itself. Boards of health, once temporary and reactive, become permanent institutions. Legislation is passed to regulate water companies, to improve drainage, to enforce sanitary standards. Slowly, grudgingly, London begins to recognize that disease is not only a matter of fate or divine punishment. It is a problem of infrastructure, of governance, of human responsibility. And yet, the struggle continues. Cholera does not vanish overnight. Further outbreaks strike in 1866, again exposing the consequences of neglect. In East London, where water supplies remained contaminated, thousands died, while districts served by cleaner water fared better. The contrast was undeniable. At last, Snow's insight found vindication. The waterborne nature of cholera could no longer be ignored. For the ordinary people of London, the reforms brought both relief and resentment. Taxes rose to fund sewers. Streets were dug up, neighborhoods disrupted. But as years passed, the benefits became clear. The death toll from cholera dwindled. The Thames grew cleaner. By the end of the 19th century, the Blue Death that once haunted Londoners had retreated. Still, the memory remained. You walk past a small churchyard in Soho and see the simple memorial plaque near Broadwick Street, formerly Broad Street, marking the spot where the pump once stood. Tourists now pause to read it. But in the 1850s, it was a place of terror. Beneath their feet lie the dead of that outbreak, interred hurriedly, without hymns, without farewells. The plaque cannot capture the cries, the stench, the panic, but it stands as a reminder of a time when filth itself became a killer. In the archives, Snow's map survives, with its cluster of black bars marking deaths around Broad Street. Each line represents a household, a life, a voice silenced. Looking at it, you cannot help but see the map as both science and memorial, a city of grief transformed into data. The legacy of cholera reshaped not only London, but the very way the world understands disease. No longer could physicians dismiss the unseen as superstition. No longer could governments ignore the infrastructure of the poor. Public health emerged as a discipline, sanitation as a moral duty, clean water as a right. And yet, even as London's sewers carried away the waste of millions, other cities around the world faced the same horrors. Cholera stalked Hamburg, Paris, Naples, Calcutta. Each outbreak echoed the lesson of London, that where filth festers, Death follows. Today, the Broad Street pump is gone. Its handle preserved as a relic of discovery. But if you stand on that corner, you can still imagine the line of mothers and children, the splash of water in tin cups, the fatal trust in what seemed pure. The silence of Soho in 1854 has passed, but its warning endures. The past is not dead. It is only waiting. You stand now at the corner of Broadwick Street, where a quiet memorial marks the site of the infamous pump. People pass by without noticing. The plaque is modest, the handle of the pump preserved as a relic. To most, it is only a curiosity. But you know what once happened here. You can still hear the faint echo of footsteps, the clatter of pails, the coughs of children, the silence of families erased. In libraries, John Snow's map survives, ink on paper. Black marks clustered like bruises around the pump. It is clinical, almost cold, but behind each line lies a human face. A household silenced, a life reduced to a statistic. Snow did not live to see the full weight of his discovery recognized. Yet his evidence transformed how we understand disease. His map was not only data, it was a memorial of grief translated into knowledge. The lesson lingers. The cholera epidemic in London was not a divine curse, nor a random fate. It was the consequence of neglect, of a city's waste poured back into its own veins. Progress, unchecked, had turned against itself. The victims of Soho died not because they were weak, but because their trust was misplaced in the very systems meant to sustain them. And what remains is the reminder that every city, every society, carries within it the seeds of its own peril. Disease is not only about pathogens, it is about poverty, about denial, about the refusal to see what is hidden in plain sight. In the end, cholera forced London to change. It built sewers. It rethought water. It gave birth to modern public health. But the price was counted in thousands of graves. You look once more at the memorial pump. Perhaps you notice a name carved faintly into the stone nearby, or a faded note left by a visitor. Small gestures, reminders that even in silence, memory endures. The past does not vanish. It waits. It lingers in brick and stone, in river and map, in the lessons carried forward by those who remain alive. And now, you too remember. You have walked the streets of Soho, smelled the stench of the Thames, seen the dead carts roll. You have stood beside the pump and watched the innocent drink their last. The story does not leave you because it is not finished. It lives as warning, as echo, as history that is never quite gone. The past is not dead. It is only waiting.